Hey guys, I'm back with another video today, and I'm kind of kicking it old school today actually. We're going to be reviewing a game from 1914 in Argentina. It was between Jose Raul Capablanca and Benito Villegas. It was an exhibition. Jose Raul Capablanca, one of the best players of all time, and he was an extremely talented speed chess player, rapid chess player, but he was also known as one of the best endgame masters of all time. Um, really made like amazing and creative moves and taught the world a lot of stuff about the endgame back when he was playing. So I think this game in particular that I'm about to show you guys is a great example of his brilliance in the endgame. And one of the reasons why I think it's so great is um, I'm going to show you some of the moves he made in the endgame, and I think they're very brilliant, but I think you'll be able to at least understand his thought process as we go through them. And it's kind of an example of how simple the game can be sometimes. Um, so, with that being said, we're going to get started. I'm going to skip over some of the earlier moves because the main focus of this is on the end game. So, I'm going to breeze through the beginning a little bit. And yeah, if you like the videos, make sure you hit the like and subscribe. So, Jose Raul Capablanca was playing with the white pieces here. Villegas was black. And we start with d4, d5, and they're going to make some developing moves here. And black is going to pin the knight with the bishop on g4 here. And then Capablanca plays c4. So if you're a fan of the Queen's Gambit declined opening, this might look familiar. He's basically playing this into a delayed Queen's Gambit, and after e6, it is Queen's Gambit declined. Obviously out of order a little bit, but nonetheless, this is how it goes. And some more development. Black places his knight on d7, and this is a key move in the Queen's Gambit decline games for black because this knight defends pawn pushes on e5 and c5, and that's pretty important usually for black to kind of break out from the chokehold that's white is going to put them under with this opening. So white castles, and after black prepares to castle with bishop e7, Capablanca is going to place his queen on c2. And that lines up a nice battery here down this potentially castled position if black goes that route. Obviously, this knight right now on f6 is defending the position, but nonetheless, it's still something to consider for black. And black does consider it. He starts to rotate his bishop all the way around back to g6 to threaten this battery, or at least to get in its way. And Capablanca continuing to develop, he prepares to play bishop b2 here. And black continues with his plan. So he doesn't feel comfortable with this battery. He wants to get rid of it. But notice Capablanca does not just capture the bishop. He's not in any rush to do that. He's still developing his pieces, and he's making his opponent waste more tempo and more moves on just dealing with this battery. So black just goes ahead and captures there, and they do a little trade, and then black castles. And Capablanca immediately brings his a rook to e1. And I thought this was a little bit strange, at least from my perspective, because typically I would normally see the f rook go there, because say if the f rook goes here, you have all these other squares here that the a rook can still go to. But by playing this move, you're kind of limiting him. But I think possibly what Capablanca was thinking here was, okay, our opponent's castled on the side of the board. I'm going to possibly shortly move this knight somewhere, and in the process, possibly after moving him, lift this pawn up, maybe push him to f4, and it's usually a good idea to have a rook behind a pawn when you're going to do something like that. So that could have been his thought process there. But the main purpose here is he's preparing to push this e pawn and break open the center of the board now that he is fully developed. And notice none of these guys, especially Capablanca, neither of these players has really started attacking yet. They continue to develop, but they wait till all their pieces are in the game before they really start making their attacking moves, and that's very important. So black plays queen to c7, connecting the rooks here and getting his queen into the game. Capablanca continues with the plan I just mentioned by playing e4, trying to break open the center of the board. So there's some trades that happen here in the center. equal material lost here by either side. Capablanca was hoping that black would play knight to f6 here. Seems like a good move. It is a good move, but after this, Capablanca would have played rook to h4 and threatened some attacks here on the king. And yeah, he could move here, let's say. But either way, it's weakening the structure in front of the king by making this move that you have to respect since it's made on the next move. But instead of playing knight to f6 here, black plays bishop to f6. Okay, so Capablanca doubles his queen on this file. And black plays pawn to c5. And this is actually a good move, a better move than you might think just for a pawn push. So this bishop has pinned the pawn here, because if this pawn captures or moves, white's bishop here is under attack. So this pawn can't move. So this pawn is now threatening the pawn here, obviously. But I think the other purpose of this move was this knight on d7 is trying to get into the game. He's developed, one move, but he's still not really doing much at d7. And right now, this knight, even before this move, this knight can't go to either of these central squares because of this pawn. So his idea is to get rid of this pawn here. And once this pawn's gone, this knight will have some squares to move to in the future. But Capablanca just jumps his knight to e5 here. Black takes the pawn on d4, and now Capablanca plays knight captures on d7, capturing the knight. And this looks a little bit funny because look who's under attack here. And black does not take the queen. You might be wondering why he doesn't take the queen. So let's see what happens if black takes this queen sacrifice, which seems very tempting here. So if black takes, white's move is going to be knight captures on f6, which is a very dangerous move. So if black decides to capture here, I'll let you guys take a look at this position for a few seconds, pause the video if you want, see if you can find the move for white. And I'll give you one hint. It's forced checkmate and not too many moves. So see if you can find that. I'll give you a couple seconds. Okay, so the move order here. The move is rook to g4 check. And this king is all by his lonesome now. There's nobody here to protect him. He only has one move here, and that's going back into the corner, followed by bishop to f6 checkmate. A nice little mating combination there. So obviously black cannot take this. So the only other move for black is to move the king into the corner. And then Capablanca would have played rook to h4. Again, if you take this pawn, you're going to blunder or checkmated too. At the same time, you're threatening another checkmate in one move here. So if you play some other random move here for black, this is checkmate. The king cannot go here because the knight's covering the square, and that's just game over. So black has to respect this, and he can't capture the knight. So black would be forced to play pawn to h6 here. And another sacrifice. White would sacrifice his rook here. And this is also a forced recapture. Black can't go here. He's in check, and he also can't still go here because of the knight. So black has to take. And then we would see the nice move here, knight to d5 check. So it's a discovered check, and he's going to recapture the queen. And white here is up a little bit of material. Still a very complicated position. But nonetheless, white would be winning there. So black does not take the queen sacrifice. Believe it or not, he just goes ahead and takes the knight back. And we have a whole bunch of trades here again. Still equal material on both sides. We have 6 pawns to 6 pawns. We have the queens and the rooks still on the board. But now notice at the end of this exchange, black has to move his queen out of the way because of this rook attack. And now we've got an open file here. And one of the keys, I guess, to using rooks in endgames, even in middle games, is doubling up rooks on open files. Extremely powerful move that sets you up really well moving forward in the game. So Capablanca takes advantage of that. And black doesn't want to let him do that. So black plays rook to d8. He's trying to threaten this dominance here. And so let's just see what would happen here. If we go through all of this, we would have equal material on the board. In fact, white could probably take this pawn, but black's going to get in potentially and do a lot of damage here. And this is a pretty equal position for both sides. So that's what black is hoping for, because right now white's got a nice advantage here with this open file. But Capablanca doesn't want to go for this for the reasons I just stated. So Capablanca actually plays pawn to b4. And I think one of the reasons why, or one of the things that you want to look for in an endgame is, yes, the pawns are equal here, right? We've got 6 pawns on either side, but on the queen side, white has a majority, 3-2 on the queen side. And that's especially noticeable because the both kings are very far away from this position, so they can't really get into the action. Obviously, there's still queens and rooks on the board, probably not safe to get into the action yet, but when you have pawn majorities on one side of the board, it's often a good idea to start utilizing that majority, start pushing these pawns, because doing so is going to create passed pawns for you, and passed pawns are very formidable at any time in the game. Passed pawns obviously are pawns where, let's say, a pawn where there's no pawns on either side to possibly attack you. So if this pawn here were gone, then this would be a passed pawn because there's no pawns here. Oops. No pawns here, and let's say he was gone, there'd be no pawns here either. That's what's known as a passed pawn. Obviously, queens and rooks can get in the way and block him, but nonetheless, that pawn is dangerous and just continues to get more dangerous as the game goes on, typically in endgames. So Capablanca pushes that pawn, and now black decides to trade the rooks on the file. And now black wants to activate this a8 rook, but he can't quite do that yet because this pawn would be hanging. So instead he prepares that by just playing pawn to b6. Capablanca moves his pawn in front of the king, giving him some breathing room. Not worrying about any back rank mates anymore, so that's good. And now black's going to double up the attack on this c pawn here. Notice there's only one defender for white right now, so Capablanca fixes that. And now black plays rook to d8. Good move. Trying to get the queen out of the way. And another important point or thing to consider when you have rooks towards the end of the game is getting rooks on the 2nd rank or the 7th rank if you're white. That's mainly because a lot of the time, a lot of these pawns on the 2nd rank in this example have not moved yet. And for example, this one's under attack. This one right now is being defended by the king, but it's still in some danger. Rooks on the 7th rank or the 2nd rank are very dangerous towards the end of the game. So it's oftentimes, you don't want to blindly put them there, but it's oftentimes good to look and see some of those tactics and see if that will help and will work towards the end of the game. So white obviously has to move out of the way, and now let's see. Now we see that black actually has the open file here, but queen to e3, going backwards. It seems like a simple move, but it's just look at how many things this move is doing, okay? Guarding the c1 rook still. It's guarding the d2 square, so like I said, black would love to get his rook here. Black cannot get his rook here with the queen in this position, okay? And the other thing that this move is doing is it's still maintaining this pressure down the diagonal, still attacking this pawn, and as we're going to see in a second, when you're pushing this majority, this c5 square is a very important square because it's going to create the passed pawn, and that's what Capablanca is interested in, is making sure he defends that square as he continues. So black trying to get his king into the game, and Capablanca pushes his pawn. Black takes it back, and you might say here, okay, let's just recapture. We've got our passed pawn. We've got 2 defenders. Capablanca plays a different move. Capablanca plays, and that wouldn't have been a bad move to do this, but Capablanca plays a move that's probably better, which is queen to e4. And the reason this move is better is for a couple of reasons. First of all, this pawn cannot actually just take the pawn here, white's pawn here, because if he does, he's hanging his queen. So he's in no rush to take this pawn back at the moment because this pawn's not going anywhere. Secondly, let's say white takes here, right? Capablanca realizes that black's next move is to put his queen right on c6, blocking the progress of this passed pawn. And now there are no pawns on either side to aid this pawn in its progress either. So this is essentially really helping to stop this pawn right in its tracks. And this is what's known as a blockade, in this case with the queen. Not always a great idea because you're kind of tying up your best piece in preventing this pawn from moving forward, but nonetheless, it's the only advantage white has right here. And this would be a blockade that would be difficult for white to wiggle his way out of. So instead of capturing the pawn, this e4 move by white prevents black from playing that blockading move because we're now attacking the square. So it's just Capablanca. Fairly simple idea, not something that, for example, I would see, but really thinking ahead in the endgame. So it's just a great move. And black plays rook to d5. Now he's double attacking this square, let's say. And he's thinking that this should prevent the recapture. Because once white recaptures, now we have two attackers. We only have one defender. So black's thinking was this would lose the pawn. Perhaps that was his thinking. Probably was, but this doesn't work. So Capablanca goes ahead and takes the pawn. And the reason this doesn't work is, maybe I'll let you guys try to figure it out. So if black captures the pawn here, right? What's the best move for white in this position? So give it a few seconds, think about it, and I will show you in a second. Okay. So the best move for white by far, congratulations if you noticed it, this king here in this vulnerable position, queen to b4. So this is pinning the rook. This rook cannot move, and now we've got a double attack on this rook. So the rook cannot just take this one because that's uncovering check here. So after the king moves out of the way, well, we've won ourselves a rook. And now this is obviously just winning for white because he has an extra rook for a pawn. So unfortunately for black, this didn't really work. And he realized it, and he did not capture the pawn here. So instead, he moves his pawn on g6. And white continues. Capablanca continues to push this pawn. And now this pawn's on the 6th rank. And this pawn is becoming a very dangerous threat for black because, obviously in 2 moves, this is going to become a queen. And as every step a passed pawn takes, it becomes a larger and larger threat. And on the 6th rank, this thing is very dangerous. So black moves his king, trying to get his king into the game. I think probably realizes that getting him into the middle is very dangerous considering all the heavy pieces, artillery that are still out here. So he moves his king to g7. Capablanca plays a4, and this is a straight up grandmaster, like 500 IQ move. I'm not going to get into the reason why he made this move. If you guys want to think about it, maybe get back to me in the comments or ask some questions about it, feel free after the game's over or, in the comments. But not going to get to that right now. But nonetheless, this is a great move. So he plays a4, and now black plays rook to d6. And black's idea here is, okay, you have this passed pawn, but I'm now trapping him. So we've got 2 attackers. I'm trapping your heavy pieces in defending this guy. You can't move your queen out of the way. You can't move your rook anywhere because you're stuck defending this very important passed pawn. And unfortunately, his idea wasn't quite right. So I guess for the 3rd time and final time in this video, why don't you pause it or think about it and see if you can find the winning move for white here that seals this game. And I'll give you a hint that has something to do with potentially allowing this pawn to keep moving up the board, if you can see that. Okay. So Capablanca's game-winning move is queen to e5 check. Doesn't look like much on the surface, but the idea is still simple because it all relates to the power of the passed pawn. So obviously the king has to move here or this check has to be blocked, so black blocks with f6. And white takes the rook on d6 with the queen. And that's you're trading your queen for a rook. So white is down a queen for a rook now, which is not a good trade on the surface. But what does this move do? It forces the queen to capture. It removes this blockade, and it allows Capablanca to push this pawn up to the 7th rank. And now this pawn is just game-endingly dangerous. The reason is because now this queen, not only can he not blockade the pawn, but he can't even defend the square anymore. Really. He cannot get back here. He cannot get around this pawn. If he goes here, obviously, that's just a capture and a queen. So black's only move would be to just capture the pawn and give up his queen, and now white is just up a rook in the end of the game. So this is just a completely winning game for white. And black did not even make this move. He just resigned in this position. I thought this was just a great example of Capablanca's endgame prowess. And I hope that you guys could follow along with some of the moves here. A lot of them come down to the power of the passed pawn, creating the passed pawn, removing blockades. In a couple of these examples, the king was just really in the wrong place at the wrong time for black, and white was ready to just use this king positioning to his advantage in terms of pinning, or in this case here actually checking the king and forcing, an extra move so that he could capture this rook here. But simple but incredible endgame moves from Capablanca. I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I will see you next time for the next video. Thanks. Hope you enjoyed it.